Did you ever wonder why the ocean moves even when the wind is still? Why waves rise and fall like a giant breathing silently beneath the Earth's surface? It's not just the wind. It's not just the Earth's spin. It's the moon. Yes, that pale, distant rock floating silently above us every night is responsible for a phenomenon that has terrified sailors, inspired poets, and puzzled scientists for centuries. They told you the moon was harmless, a dead satellite, lifeless and cold. But what they didn't tell you is that it moves oceans. It shifts millions of gallons of water every minute without ever touching a drop. Power isn't just gravitational, it's something older, something primal. And we've only begun to understand what it really means. In ancient times, fishermen would not go to sea during a full moon. They believed the tides carried souls. They believed the moon could listen, and sometimes respond. Modern science dismissed these as myths. But what if they weren't wrong? What if they were just interpreting something our modern instruments still can't measure? When you stand on a beach and the water creeps toward your feet, you are witnessing the invisible hand of the moon reaching across space. It pulls the entire ocean toward it. Not just on the side facing the moon, but also on the opposite side. Of the Earth to tidal bulges. Two undeniable signs that Earth's largest bodies of water are dancing to the rhythm of a distant drummer. Imagine that for a moment. The moon, which is about 384,400 kilometers away, can stretch water across an entire planet. You can't see the pull, you can't hear it, but it's always there, even in your sleep, even when no one's watching. But there's more. Tides aren't just about water. They affect Earth's crust too. They create stress deep underground. And some scientists believe they can even trigger earthquakes. Yes, earthquakes. Events that shake the very foundation of cities and mountains. Might be set off by a celestial body orbiting far above our heads. The moon's influence doesn't stop at the sea. It extends into our brains. Research has shown strange correlations between lunar cycles and human behavior. More of visits, more emotional instability, more vivid dreams. Some say it's coincidence, but others know better. They've seen it, felt it. The moon doesn't just reflect sunlight, it reflects secrets. For decades, space agencies like NASA have observed anomalies during certain lunar alignments. Tidal events far more powerful than any model predicted, sudden surges in gravitational energy, strange electromagnetic readings. But these findings are rarely publicized. Why? Because if the truth was known that a silent object in the sky has the power to manipulate not just oceans, but tectonic plates and possibly even human minds, people would panic. They'd start to wonder what else the moon controls. It sees what else it remembers. There's a story from a remote island in the Pacific. Locals say that once every generation, during a rare moon phase, the sea vanishes for hours. Not just recedes, but disappears. Boats are left stranded on dry ocean floor. Fish gasp in open air. Then, suddenly, the sea returns with a violence that swallows everything in its path. Scientists call it an anomalous tidal displacement. The islanders call it the breath of the moon. And no one can explain it. This is just the beginning of the mystery. The moon is not just a rock. It's a force, a guide, manipulator. Its gravitational pull is just a hint of its true power. And yet, we continue to look at it as decoration in the night sky. Harmless, distant, passive, but the moon is watching. The moon is listening, and it is not done. Asterisk. There was a night when everything felt wrong. The air was heavy. The sea was still. No wind, no waves. And yet every tide monitoring station along the eastern seaboard began to flash red. Emergency alerts were triggered. Water levels rose in places they shouldn't have. Docks flooded, boats cracked against concrete, all within a window of 23 minutes. Then, just as suddenly, everything returned to normal. The explanation? A lunar anomaly? That's what the official report said. A subtle gravitational shift due to a microwobble in the moon's orbit. But those who study these events closely know that the term microwobble is a placeholder, a label used when science doesn't have an answer. One geophysicist who later disappeared without a trace wrote in his final email to a colleague, "The moon isn't reacting to gravity, it's reacting to us." For centuries, humans believed they were separate from the cosmos, that the sky was above the earth, below, and never the two would meet. But the moon proves that's a lie, connects the heavens to the sea, the sky to our bones, you see. Every time the moon rises, it lifts more than water. It lifts memory, pain, ancient echoes locked in the sea. That's why people feel restless during a full moon. That's why dreams feel more real. The moon pulls at the parts of us we've buried. During a lunar eclipse in 1996, coastal sensors in South America picked up a strange signal, one that resembled human brainwave patterns. But it came from the ocean. And it only occurred while the moon was shadowed. Scientists laughed it off as a machine error. But what if it wasn't? What if tides are more than water? What if they're a language? Biologists in Japan discovered that coral reefs begin spawning, not at the same hour, but at the same exact minute, based on moonlight. Across continents, thousands of miles apart, underwater life responds in perfect unison. No Wi-Fi, no clocks, just the moon. This isn't random. This is design. But the question no one wants to ask is, who designed it?
Aus.
There are ancient carvings in the Andes that show the moon with arms. It's not symbolic arms, literal ones, stretching down to the ocean, lifting waves. These carvings are 10,000 years old, predating known oceanography by millennia. The figures around the moon are bowing, not praying, submitting. Some researchers believe these civilizations witnessed a lunar event, a moment when the moon did something it shouldn't, something it hasn't done since. But the records are incomplete. Stone can only hold so much, and stories fade until they're pulled back up by the tides. In 2004, during the Indian Ocean tsunami, satellite footage showed an unusual light pattern on the surface of the water pulses, synchronized with the moon's orbit. These were dismissed as reflections or imaging glitches. But a team of independent astronomers tried to replicate the pulses in lab conditions and failed. Pattern didn't match any known frequency. It was unique. The only time they saw it again was during a full moon, 6 years later, when a series of rogue waves struck the same coastline. Coincidence? Or is the moon sending signals we haven't yet learned to read? Some cultures bury their dead facing the moon. Others believe the moon is a soul catcher, holding the spirits of those lost at sea. There are stories of people walking into the ocean under moonlight and never returning. No footprints. No remains. Just ripples and silence. Is it myth or memory? Can ignore the waves. You can pretend they're harmless. But when you stand on the shore, feeling the pull in your chest, the moon is not just a witness, it's a participant. Asterisk in 2017. A small research station in northern Greenland recorded a tidal shift that should have been impossible. The ice shelf beneath the station rose nearly 4 meters within 30 minutes, without seismic activity or wind pressure. The only known force capable of moving that much mass in such a short time is gravity. But the moon was in a waning crescent. Low influence, minimal pull. According to physics, it couldn't have happened, yet it did. The research team reported low-frequency vibrations before the rise. Subsonic waves barely detectably, originating not from within the Earth, but from above, a vertical pulse. Measured, rhythmic, directed. One of the scientists reportedly wrote in his field log, "It felt like the moon was breathing." That log was never recovered. Only fragments remained, frozen in shattered instruments. The station is now abandoned. What are we dealing with? Perhaps the better question is, how long has it been happening? The oldest recorded tidal map comes from the ancient city of Ur. Dated around 2000 BC, it shows a clear lunar calendar, tracking not only the phases of the moon but corresponding water levels. There's a section marked with a symbol, scholars haven't been able to decode a circular shape with alternating lines pointing in and out. Some call it a wave gate. There's a warning. Even in 2000 BC, They understood the moon could unlock something, not just movement. Access Tide Pools Act. Like memory banks, they hold echoes of storms, temperature shifts, magnetic pulses. The ocean remembers everything. And when the moon pulls, it doesn't just move, water it, stirs the archive. Unlocks messages buried in brine. The CIA once ran a program in the 1980s attempting to track lunar influence on behavioral patterns in coastal cities. Data showed spikes in domestic violence, insomnia, and psychotic breaks during specific tidal alignments. The report was buried, the program canceled. Officially, it never existed, but the moon kept pulling. A retired naval captain once told a story that never left him. During a routine patrol in the Atlantic, his ship's instruments began malfunctioning. Compasses spun. Radios crackled with whispers in languages no one recognized. And then the sea went quiet, not still quiet. No waves, no current. Just a flat, black sheet of water under a full moon for 17 minutes. When the waves returned, they came in reverse, flowing away from the moon, defying every known law of physics. The ship's logs were confiscated. The crew separated. The incident never entered the official record. There is a lake in Siberia known as Lake Baikal. It's the deepest freshwater lake in the world, and it's ancient, over 25 million years old. Locals call it the Eye of the Earth. In March 2009, satellite images showed a massive circular pattern etched into the ice nearly 5 kilometers wide, perfectly symmetrical. It appeared overnight during a full moon. Scientists speculated that it was caused by rising methane bubbles trapped under the ice. But that doesn't explain the precision of the pattern, or the fact that similar shapes began appearing in other lakes around the globe always, during specific lunar alignments. When these patterns are overlaid with tidal force models, they reveal a hidden symmetry. Not just in water, but in geometry. Spirals, waves, loops, sol. Centered on lunar energy, the moon isn't just moving oceans. It's organizing them in a lab in France. A physicist was experimenting with microfluidic Chambersteiny water systems, used to simulate ocean behavior in a controlled environment. When he exposed the chambers to moonlight using a high-fidelity lunar reflector, the water began to oscillate, not randomly, but rhythmically. The oscillations matched the Schumann resonance, Earth's natural electromagnetic frequency. But here's the strange part. The effect only occurred when the reflector was tuned to mimic specific lunar angles, not just full moonlight, specific degrees. It was as if the water recognized the orientation of the moon, not just its presence. That experiment was never published. The funding was pulled. The lab was shut down, not long after the physicist left the country. There's a theory among a small group of researchers called the resonance threshold hypothesis. It proposes that the moon and the Earth are part of a harmonic pair of two bodies, locked in a gravitational song that affects not only oceans and weather, but memory, biology, even time perception. When certain thresholds are re-specific, alignments, energies, conditions, the song changes, reality shifts. In remote Alaska, an entire pod of whales beached themselves under a supermoon. Not because they were sick, not because they were lost, but because, according to sonar logs, they were following a deep sound. A tone that moved through the ocean at impossible speeds, bouncing off trenches and ridges like sonar from a giant, its unseen source. They followed it until they hit land, and they didn't stop. What kind of signal compels life to abandon its instinct to survive? What kind of force makes water flow uphill? Compasses lose north, animals defy evolution. In 1971, Apollo 14 astronauts brought back lunar samples that contained trace minerals never found on Earth. Some of those samples, when exposed to salt water, in lab conditions, generated minor electromagnetic fields. No one could replicate the effect, stopped after a few weeks. But during those weeks, every plant in the lab grew faster. Every sensor picked up strange pulses. And one researcher claimed that the building's plumbing began vibrating at night. They sealed the samples. They moved the lab. But the notes remain. You. Don't move a lab unless you're afraid of what it found. There's a reason so many ancient cultures treated the moon as a deity. Not just for its light, but for its influence. It was feared, it was worshipped. It was obeyed. The Dogon people of Mali speak of a satellite that controls life on Earth, not just orbits it. They called it Potolo, the deep star, and described its influence on water and blood. They said it breathes once every 1,000 years. When it exhales, oceans rise. When it inhales, deserts bloom. To most, these are myths, but myths carry memory. What if the moon has cycles we haven't lived long enough to witness? Cycles that go beyond the tides, beyond the seasons, beyond history. Cycles that reset the Earth. Every drop of water in the ocean has been touched by the moon, stirred, shifted, trained to respond. The tides are not just movement there. Memory. They're instruction. Programming written in salt, and one day the moon may call it all back. Asterisk, in 2006. A deep-sea listening station near the Azores picked up a sound no one could explain. It lasted only 37 seconds, but covered frequencies across the entire auditory spectrum: high-pitched whines, low sub-bass rumblings, and a strange middle tone that pulsed exactly 8 times per second. Every attempt to trace its source failed. It didn't come from a whale, a submarine, or any known geological event. It came from everywhere at once. Oceanographers named it the bloom out. Because during those 37 seconds, plankton in the area multiplied at abnormal rates. Fish congregated near the sound source, forming patterns too complex to be accidental. It was as if the sea had received instructions. The sound never repeated, or at least, not where we could hear it. But 3 months later, on the opposite side of the planet near New Zealand, a team of marine biologists observed a mass spawning of bioluminescent organisms 100 times the normal count. The timing was exact. The next. Perigee moon. That's not coincidence. That's synchronization. The moon didn't just pull the tides, it sent a message, and the ocean obeyed. Patterns began to emerge. Researchers comparing decades of satellite tide data noticed periodic anomalous, small surges every 19 years, aligning perfectly with the metonic cycle, a known lunar pattern. But within that cycle were microcycle shifts that didn't align with gravitational theory alone. Something else was happening, something deeper in Peru. Archaeologists uncovered an ancient coastal temple buried in sand for over 2,000 years. On its walls were etched repeating waves, always 3, always rising, toward a single crescent moon. Beneath the carvings was a narrow tunnel, filled with salt water, even miles from the sea. Inside that tunnel, the walls hummed, not constantly only. During specific moon phases, the vibration was faint, barely perceptible, but measurable. It matched tidal frequencies in the Pacific. The temple was listening, or remembering. One physicist suggested the temple was built not to worship the moon, but to communicate with it, and perhaps it still does, in 1983. An underwater cable connecting Hawaii to California recorded a sudden voltage spike during a lunar eclipse. For exactly 9 minutes, data flowed in both directions at triple capacity, carrying unreadable code sequences of symbols and waveforms that didn't match any known transmission format. Engineers blamed a hardware fault, but the data still exists, stored, untranslated. Some say it resembled the waveform of human EEG signals, specifically the theta state. A dream state? Did the moon send a dream? Or did the ocean awaken one? There are places in the sea that defy gravity, spots where water stands taller than it should, moving against prevailing currents, pushing ships subtly off course.
Mariner's call.
These ghost tides. Satellite data shows they often occur during lunar standstills moments, when the moon's declination stops increasing or decreasing. During these standstills, something else happens too. Time feels different. Clocks near. These regions run slower. Not by much, milliseconds, but consistently, repeatedly. Atomic time and mechanical time lose sync. The moon is not just bending water. It's bending time. On a remote island in the southern Indian Ocean, old stories tell of the night of the 3 moons, a time when the sky reflected 3 perfect lunar bodies. The event was said to cause the sea to retreat so far that fish rained from the sky. Scientists claim this is impossible, but every 709 years, astronomical models show an illusion 3 reflected moon images caused by atmospheric lensing. It's only visible from that island, and each time strange tidal events follow, waves that turn inward, water that spirals down like a drain, not outward, but deep into the earth. Where does it go? And what calls it back? If the moon has the power to move oceans, shift time, and alter biology, then what else is it capable of? What happens when it reaches full resonance? Some believe that day is coming, and when it does, the tides will no longer rise in rhythm. They will rise in response. In 1968, a Soviet submarine operating in the Arctic reported a phenomenon that has never been declassified in full, according to leaked logs. The crew encountered a sudden vertical wall of water beneath the ice, rising from the depths, not falling. The sonar image showed a dome hundreds of meters wide, pressing upward into the ice layer above. It wasn't an eruption or a thermal current. It was cold, silent, and calculated. The submarine attempted to ascend but lost power. 4:13 minutes, it drifted weightless and still as if suspended in something thicker than water. Then the anomaly vanished. Power returned. The dome collapsed, and the sea returned to normal. What caused it? The captain, years later, claimed he saw light in the water, not bioluminescence, structured light, lines, grids, patterns like circuitry. Embedded in liquid, he called it a map that moved. That same night, seismographs in Greenland recorded low-frequency pulses. Spaced exactly 29.5 seconds apart, the duration of a lunar synodic cycle divided into a single rotation. A perfect harmonic resonance. It was the ocean syncing with the moon, or the moon syncing with the ocean. In 1994, scientists studying tidal basins in the Indian Ocean found that certain microcrustaceans followed lunar rhythms more precisely than atomic clocks. When isolated from moonlight, they still pulsed, still moved, as if receiving an invisible signal. It wasn't light. It wasn't gravity. It was something else. An unseen thread. Some began to call it the tidal code. Across cultures, across continents, water ceremonies aligned with moon phases appear with striking regularity. Aboriginal tribes in Australia, islanders in the Pacific, ancient Celts in Europe marked the moon not just as a timekeeper, but as a messenger. Ceremonies were held when tides turned sharp, when water rose with unexpected force. Offerings were made, songs were sung, and sometimes, they said, the water would listen, change direction, or speak back. In 2011, after the Fukushima earthquake, oceanographers noticed a curious tidal formation days before the event. A triple crest wave formation, sharp, fast, and perfectly symmetrical, was recorded off the coast. It didn't fit any known seismic precursor, no foreshocks, no tectonic stress indicators, but the moon was in perigee, and something had shifted. The gravitational models couldn't explain the force. It was as if the ocean anticipated the rupture, or was warned. Can water receive warnings, or remember them? Memory in water is a controversial idea, yet experiments show that water structures itself around intention. High-resolution imaging reveals molecular shifts based on sound, emotion, even words. And when moonlight is introduced, the patterns become more coherent, more ordered, structured. It's not pseudoscience. It's a field no one wants to admit is real because it challenges everything. If water remembers, and the moon can speak to it, then we are surrounded by a living archaean ocean of memory, responding to a satellite of intention. What is the moon telling the sea? What has it always been saying? In ancient Sumerian texts, there are references to the Great Puller, a force that rises when the eye of the sky reaches its peak. Translations describe walls of water walking across the land and the pulse that commands the deep. No one took it seriously. But in 2015, Satellite footage off the coast of Madagascar showed a rising wall of water, not a tsunami. Not a storm surged, a wave, 5 stories high, moving in a perfect arc with no storm, no seismic activity, no warning. It moved inland for over a mile, then receded. Not a single human fatality. It was as if the water knew where to go, what to avoid, what to say. They called it a fluke. But ocean data, captured during the event, revealed something strange. A drop in salinity right before the wave struck. A thin line of fresh water in the middle of the ocean, appearing as if poured from above. No clouds, no rain, just fresh water. Falling, the sea and sky are not separate. They are collaborators. And the moon is their signal. Asterisk. In 1973, during a classified marine biology expedition off the coast of Greenland, a team of scientists deployed a submersible drone into a fjord known for its strange tidal behavior. The drone descended into calm, clear water. For the first 200 meters, everything was normal. Then, suddenly, the pressure sensor spiked. Not from depth, but from something pulsing against the hull. Rhythmic, calculated, the drones. Cameras picked up nothing at first. Then, from the dark, lines began to appear in the water, shimmering waves of density, like heat ripples, but colder. Each wave aligned with the moon's position in the sky, adjusting in real time as the moon moved. The water itself was responding. One technician described it as watching the sea breathe not in or out, but in all directions at once. At the bottom of the fjord, the drone found a cavern. Inside, it recorded a single structure, circular layered, like a shell pulsating slowly with bioluminescence. Not coral, not rock, something unknown. And every pulse aligned perfectly with lunar seconds. The drone's feed ended abruptly. The team returned with no footage, no drone, and no explanation. The logs were sealed. In 2001, a researcher in Norway published a paper about tidal intelligence. The idea that certain parts of the ocean exhibit behavior that suggests not randomness, but preference. Some bays swell faster than others, even with identical lunar influence. Some currents resist change, flowing counter to tidal expectations. He proposed that the ocean contains areas of cognitive current, places where water learns from its surroundings, learns, adapts, responds. He was laughed out of the academic community, but his paper survived. Buried in obscure journals. Later rediscovered by climate modelers in 2020, who noticed their simulations kept failing unless they factored in unexplainable tidal shifts, shifts that occurred only under certain moonlight angles. Why would water care about the angle of the moon, unless it was reading something, decoding something? In 1988, a sailor in the South Atlantic reported a patch of sea where his compass spun wildly for hours, even though the weather was clear. His ship drifted slowly, in a circle, caught in what he called a wheel of tide. He dropped anchor, but the chain rose upward, not downward, taut as if suspended in the air. When the moon passed overhead, the tension snapped. The anchor dropped. The water returned to normal. No instruments could explain the force, but the sailor never forgot the sensation. It was like the moon saw me, he said, and for a moment it held the sea in place. In 2022, scientists studying lunar gravity noticed microfluctuations in the moon's mass distribution. These shifts were so subtle they didn't affect orbit, but they did influence water on Earth. Tides moved out of sync by milliseconds. Too fast for human senses. But not for the ocean. The ocean adjusted instantly. No hesitation, no confusion, just response. As if the two were not separate systems, but one body, one awareness. A single breathing entity spread across distance, connected by something invisible and ancient. In Mesopotamian lore, there is mention of Namu, the primeval sea goddess who gave birth to the heavens and earth. She was said to sleep beneath the sea, waking only when the moon calls her name. We call these myths, but myths are often what science hasn't yet named. So what happens if the moon calls again? What happens if the tide doesn't just rise but answers? In 1959, during a routine sonar scan in the South China Sea, a good military vessel recorded a vast underwater formation shifting shape. At first, it appeared to be a typical seamount, but over the course of 90 minutes, it began to undeal it slow. Wave-like movements, perfectly timed with the moon's rise. The crew watched in silence as the formation flattened, then lifted again, creating concentric rings of pressure that traveled outward in uniform pulses. It wasn't rock, it wasn't alive. Either it was responding, the official report described it as a submarine pressure anomaly. But the confidential logs mentioned something else. The ship's onboard chronometers lost 31 seconds during the event. Time didn't just feel strange, it bent. Every measurement corrupted, except one, the moon's position. The moon held steady. In the late 1990s, climatologists discovered something peculiar in data gathered from the Southern Ocean, a repeating cycle of temperature and salinity, shifts occurring every 9.3 years. Not 10, not 9, 9.3. That number meant something. It was half of the moon's full nodal cyclone, 18.6 year orbit that subtly alters its gravitational pull on Earth. The ocean wasn't just being moved by the moon. It was anticipating its movements, calculating ahead. Changing in preparation, not reaction. There is no model that accounts for this, except one. And that model assumes the ocean is thinking. What would it mean for science, for the world, if the ocean were not simply a mass of moving water, but a vast, slow consciousness? One that uses the moon as both a clock and a voice. In 2007, divers exploring a cave system off the Yucatan Peninsula reported losing sense of depth. Not from pressure or panic, but from disorientation in gravity. They swam down, but their bodies felt weightless. Compass needles spun without stop. Their voices, recorded through underwater mics, echoed unnaturally, repeating phrases. Seconds after being spoken, the phenomenon stopped, precisely as the moon set. Their footage was confiscated by authorities citing national security. Why? Would the moon's setting end an anomaly beneath the sea, lest something was listening to its presence and shut down when it disappeared? Around the same time, an oceanographic satellite detected a burst of energy emanating from the middle of the Pacific. It wasn't electromagnetic. It wasn't heat. It was dot 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 rhythm, a vibrational surge that rippled across the surface and vanished into the Arctic. When layered over lunar trajectory data, the surge formed a perfect arc mirror of the moon's path across the sky on that day. It wasn't a wave. It was a reply. In 2020, coral reefs in 3 different oceans began bleaching and regrowing in synchronized spirals, visible only from high-altitude drones. The growth patterns followed a mathematical model first proposed for moon orbital mechanics, not biology. Why would coral obey lunar equations? Why would fish spawn on nights of certain moon shadows, shadows too faint for their eyes to detect? Because it isn't vision they're using, it's reception. They are tuned, lined, guided not by instinct, but by frequency. And that frequency comes from above. In a forgotten crypt beneath an old Portuguese cathedral lies a map carved into stone. It shows the Earth with 7 concentric waves extending outward from its oceans. At the center is a symbol half circle, half eye. The inscription reads, "The sea remembers. The sky repeats. The moon commands." Every modern tool or satellites are submarines. Our simulations tries to make sense of the tides through gravity, mass, and inertia. But what if we've been wrong? What if the tides are not the result of force but of instruction? The moon does not push the ocean, it summons it. And one day soon, the ocean may rise, not because of where the moon is, but because of what the moon says asterisk in 1965. The Deep-Sea Acoustic Lab off the coast of Nova Scotia recorded a sequence of underwater sounds that baffled the scientific team. At first, they thought it was whale song, but the pattern was too structured, too precise. Every tone followed a rising and falling frequency that matched the moon's orbit over a 27.3-day cycle. When the team played back the recording at 100x speed, the sounds formed a melodic pattern like a chant. A linguist who later examined the data suggested that the tones mirrored ancient proto-language syllables. The sea wasn't making noise. It was speaking, and the timing was unmistakable. The recordings began precisely at lunar zenith and ceased the moment the moon fell below the horizon. Who was the audience? In 1999, oceanographers mapped a strange void deep within the Atlantic Ridge. Not a trench, not a cave.
Ow.
A space perfectly spherical, devoid of sediment, fish, even microorganisms. At its center, the water was warmer by exactly 2.7 degrees Celsius, matching the delta shift of Earth's tidal force at lunar perigee. The moon was not nearby. It was directly above. The shape, the heat, the silence, none of it should exist. But it did. One diver who descended into the area described the sensation as being inside a heartbeat, not hearing one, feeling it. The walls of the void, though invisible, seemed to pulse. And as the diver reached the center, his watch mechanical, waterproof, high-precision stopped completely when he rose back to the surface. The watch ticked again, and his nose bled for hours. We are told the moon causes tides through gravity, that the rising and falling of oceans is a side effect of planetary motion. But what if it's the opposite? What if the moon orbits Earth not to control tides but to stay close to what lies beneath? In 1978, a Japanese oil rig struck a layer of rock 2 kilometers under the seafloor that rang like metal when drilled. The vibrations caused surface waves to form even though the sea was calm. Nearby fishing boats reported their hulls vibrating. And as the drill continued, strange fluctuations were reported in local radio frequencies. One frequency kept repeating, low hum at 210.42 hertz, the frequency of monoise. The company halted the project. Site was sealed, the workers never returned. Decades later, a private research team uncovered seismic data from that same region, showing massive subsurface cavities aligned in concentric rings that matched tidal bulges from lunar orbit. The deeper the ring, the stronger the magnetic interference. And in the very center, flat zone where no signal could pass, a blind spot in the sea. We're not supposed to know what's down there because it isn't just depth that hides things. It's memory. Salt water preserves ancient information, fossils, DNA, vibrations, patterns, every movement of the sea. Is a line in a script we haven't learned to read? But the moon can read it. It pulls those lines upward. It extracts meaning from the depths. The moon is not an observer. It is a translator, and perhaps a messenger. In Polynesian lore. The moon is said to be the home of the first voice the being. That taught the ocean to listen. The chant that formed the first wave, these aren't metaphors. They are recordings passed down through story, because we've forgotten how to listen directly. But the sea hasn't, and the moon never stopped speaking so. What happens when the message is complete? When the tide doesn't rise to follow the moon, but to deliver its reply? Asterisk. In 2014, an unmanned oceanic drone operating under NASA's aquatic systems monitoring program picked up something extraordinary near the Tonga Trench. It had been scanning tectonic vibrations, but what it found was not seismic, it was rhythmic. A repeated pulse like a heartbeat coming from the trench floor, every 38 minutes. The pulse repeated, and every time it did, the ocean temperature in a 4-kilometer radius rose by exactly 0.4 degrees Celsius for 7 seconds. Then dropped. No volcanic activity, no currents, just that rhythm. When the pulse was mapped against lunar movement, a revelation emerged. The pulse matched the moon's oscillation speed across the Earth's curvature, an invisible harmonic, repeating every lunar transit. One geophysicist wrote in his notes, "It's as if the moon is knocking, and something is answering. But what?" In the archives of a 15th century Portuguese explorer's diary, there's an entry that speaks of a silver river in the Sian, underwater current that shimmered with light during full moons. His crew believed it was a sign of favor from the heavens. But in the margins, He wrote something else. When the silver flowed, the compass died. That's the same phenomenon modern sailors report in the South Atlantic. An anomaly, a strange region where magnetic fields weaken and instruments fail. And satellite scans have shown that tidal forces in that zone shift ever so slightly during specific moon phases, pulling water in a direction inconsistent with both gravitational logic and planetary spin. It's not an anomaly, it's a pattern. A pattern we keep pretending is an accident. In 2005, an amateur radio enthusiast in Chile tuned into a strange frequency echoing from a tidal buoy off the coast. He thought it was a malfunction until he recorded the signal over the course of a full lunar month. Every night the pattern shifted slightly, like musical notation changing key. When he sped it up 300 times, the pattern resembled a melody's low. Sweeping, haunting, he called it the ocean's lullaby. It was never heard again. But during that same month, tides in the area surged without warning. Not just up but inward. Seawater moved against the shape of the coastline, bending into harbors and flooding dry docks, as if summoned. Why does this matter? Because it's happening more. In the last decade, unexplainable tidal surges have increased by 16%. Places once immune to sea change, landlocked bays, protected lagoons are now experiencing ghost tides. Water that rises when it shouldn't, waves that collapse soundlessly, and always beneath a specific angle of moonlight. Not full moon, not new moon, but the transitional phases, the in-between. In 2023, off the western coast of Greenland, a team of marine geologists studying glacial melt patterns encountered a series of deep-water vibrations, low, resonant pulses spaced exactly 2.5 hours apart. They were strong enough to register on seismographs but did not originate from tectonic movement. Instead, they seemed to echo from within the ocean itself, traveling upward, not outward. Each pulse coincided precisely with a slight dip in the moon's altitude. It was as if the ocean was responding to the moon's movement in real time. As a reaction, but as a ritual. When one of the divers descended into the source, equipment insulated from noise, he heard nothing. But when he surfaced, his helmet's audio log had recorded something else entirely. A voice. Not speech. Not language, but layered frequencies. Rising and falling in patterns identical to ancient Sumerian, scales used in religious chants. The patterns were identical to the stone frequency of ziggurat, temple structures long believed to mirror celestial mechanics. Why would the sea echo the sound of ancient sky temples? Unless the sea remembers. Unless it was there in a lab in Sweden. The researchers studying molecular resonance discovered that water molecules under exposure to controlled lunar spectrum, light began to spin in alignment. Not just vibrate, spin, as if caught in a torque field. The angle of the spin matched the moon's inclination. The experiment was never published. 3 of the researchers left the university. One of them, an anonymous forum post, wrote, "We made the water sing. Then it sang back." What happens when you awaken something that has only ever been listening? Throughout the Pacific Islands, folklore speaks of moon paths, shimmering lanes that appear across water, not just as reflections, but as roots. Fishermen tell of fish that follow these paths instinctively, as if drawn into some invisible choreography. Satellite imaging in 2020 confirmed that fish migration patterns shift dramatically during specific lunar phases, changing direction not toward food, warmth, or shelter, but toward open, empty water, toward moonlight. What is it they sense? What are they swimming toward? In 1977, an unmanned weather buoy near Iceland recorded a wave that moved against every current. It wasn't the height that confused researchers. It was the direction. It traveled west while every other current moved east. It passed beneath the buoy and triggered its magnetic sensor knot from below. But from above, there was nothing in the sky, nothing we could see. But for 13 seconds, the buoy's data log spiked. Magnetics, salinity, pressure, even light. Seat. It was as if the ocean had bent upward, as if something rose between the water and the sky and then vanished. What? If the ocean and the moon aren't separate, what if they're two halves of something larger? Two lenses of a single eye. We have always assumed the sea is a passive mirror, something that reflects but does not decide. But what if the ocean is a vault? What if it waits? There are ancient petroglyphs. In Norway, thousands of years old, showing men with nets not cast into water, but raised to the sky. Below them, waves. Up. Above them, the crescent moon. Between them, symbols for sound. They believed something was being fished from above, and the moon was the hook in modern times. Lunar perigee, the point when the moon is closest to Earth, has been increasing in significance. Tides are higher. Winds are stronger. More species spawn. More animals migrate. More humans report sleep disturbances, lucid dreams, even hallucinations. It's not chaos. It's rhythm. It's alignment. It's the echo of a system older than biology older. Then memory waking up again. Some theorists believe the moon is not an origin point, but a relay. That its perfect orbit, its perfect dimensions, and its perfect synchronization with Earth's tides make it an instrument, not a coincidence. An instrument of transmission and what it transmits. The sea remembers. The ocean is not a body of water. It is a recorder, a vessel for a message delivered in waves. Over centuries, through gravity and silence, and now, with every rising tide, presses against the shore a little harder, as if trying to say, it's time. Asterisk, in late 2024. During an international deep-sea exploration mission funded jointly by oceanographic institutes from 5 countries, submersible reached a previously uncharted trench in the Indian Ocean. The team expected to find silt, pressure, darkness. Instead, they found stillness so complete that even sonar returned blank. No echoes, no life, just silence. And then the sub's lights flickered. Not off, not dimmed, but pulsed. Once every 9.3 seconds. Back on the surface, the crew watching the live feed noticed something strange. The pulses of light perfectly matched the current phase of the moon, not just in duration, but in waveform. The moon's reflected light over Earth was replicating itself in a lightless trench. No signal was being sent, and yet the response was exact. What technology receives without transmission? What medium listens without being told? The answer, perhaps, is water, pure, dense, ancient water, and something in it. The sub-sensors began recording fluctuations in the magnetic field, not in one direction, but in a spiral. A twisting force that seemed to rotate in perfect alignment with the moon's 5 orbital tilt, a tilt so minor. Most instruments ignore it, but the ocean doesn't ignore anything. Back on land, when the footage was reviewed frame by frame, one researcher spotted a single distortion at the edge of the frame, not a shadow, not a creature, a shimmer, like heat above asphalt, but underwater. And then, in one frame, something else, an eye, not a literal one, but a perfectly circular ripple concentric. Waves that emerged from nowhere pulsed once and vanished at the exact moment of lunar transit. That ripple's radius, 1.73 kilometers. The exact ratio between the moon's radius and Earth's radius. Coincidence or signature? For thousands of years, Earth's oceans have been moved by the moon, yes. But not randomly. Not just pulled, shaped, patterned, taught, and those patterns are everywhere, on fish scales, on waveforms, even in the neural oscillations of the human brain during REM sleep. Sleep researchers now report a statistically significant spike in vivid dreaming during third-quarter moons. Why? There is no gravitational explanation. But if water is the storage, and the moon is the signal, what happens when the water inside us begins syncing with the water outside us? When our dreams aren't our own? In 1984, Soviet scientists studying lunar gravity effects on crops made an unauthorized detour into brainwave experimentation. They placed human subjects inside isolation chambers surrounded by salt water and exposed them to simulated lunar pulses. The result? At the moment the simulated moon reached zenith, subjects began reciting numbers, long strings of numbers. They were meaningless until someone overlaid them against ancient tidal tables from Mesopotamia. The numbers matched the rise and fall of water from over 4,000 years ago. How did they know? Or rather, how did the water know? A small percentage of those test subjects later reported recurring dreams of drowning, yes, but also of breathing underwater, cities made of stone and pressure, of lightless vaults humming with a slow, deep sound they could not describe, but never forgot, and in those dreams. The moon was always there, not above, but inside the sea, rising, waiting, every culture that lives by the water has a flood myth, a story of the sea rising beyond reason, of a great cleansing, of knowledge returning with the waves, not destruction. Return. The Dogon people say the moon was sent to Earth by no beings from the water who taught language, balance, and rhythm. The Zulu speak of the moon as an egg from which the waters of Earth were poured. The Japanese describe Tsukuyomi, the moon god, as the one who watches over the eternal sea. Maybe we have misunderstood. Maybe the moon is not a rock, not a lamp, not a tool. Maybe it's a memory, a preserved intelligence, one that sings in gravity, light, one that only the ocean can understand. And now, as the tides push higher, reach farther, spiral faster, maybe the sea is no longer listening. Maybe it's finally answering. In early 2025, a group of independent marine archaeologists diving off the coast of Micronesia stumbled upon a submerged structure unlike anything seen before. It wasn't coral, it wasn't volcanic, and it wasn't accidental. Regular steps, perfectly symmetrical ridges, and most disturbingly grooves cut into the rock in wave-like patterns. Each one spaced apart by exactly 29.53 inches, the length of the lunar month. In inches, they brought back fragments for analysis. Under the microscope, the stone showed microscopic fractures, hundreds of thousands of them arranged in spiral layers. Not formed by pressure or age, formed by resonance. Something had vibrated these stones from the inside. For centuries, one geologist hypothesized the source had to be celestial. The data matched no known Earth-based pattern, but one did match. The gravity map of the moon's dark side. Not just similar, identical. A shape buried underwater on Earth, carved by the invisible fingers of something orbiting it above, and yet deeper questions remained. What was this place? Who built it? Why align it with the moon? Maybe the better question was, how did it respond? In 1972, a French oceanic team, measuring current speeds off the coast of Madagascar, lost contact with one of their buoys. When they retrieved it days later, it was covered in fine, pale sediment never found in that region. It's not even on the sea floor. Carbon dating showed it. Was older than the Indian Ocean itself. When analyzed, the particles emitted faint electromagnetic pulses. Pulses that repeated in a pattern eerily similar to lunar orbital velocity. The ocean had lifted something from beneath the crust, and it had brought it up. Precisely when the moon reached its highest point over the equator that year, as if summoned, as if released, back in the Atlantic. A massive sonar sweep near the Puerto Rico Trench revealed a series of unexplained hollows in the seabed, not caves, but sinkholes, perfectly domed cavities, one measuring a precise harmonic multiple of the Earth's circumference divided by lunar mean distance. These were not geological features, they were racinates. Built or formed, it's received to amplify, to echo. And when an autonomous drone was lowered into the largest cavity, the sensors recorded one thing before shutting down completely. Sound, a single low-frequency note held for 12 seconds. The note frequency, 210.42 Hz. The same note heard from multiple anomalies. Worldwide, always at the same depth, always during the same moon phase, the note appears not in human voice range, not in whale song, not in machine, only in the sea, and it never repeats at random. Waits for alignment. For signal, in temples across ancient Cambodia, moonlight was used to illuminate specific symbols carved into stone on only one night of the year. When the moon struck just right, those symbols reflected onto shallow pools of water below, creating messages that were only legible in the rippling light. Instructions, maps, rituals. They all involved water, and always the sea nearby was considered sacred. Not because it gave life, but because it knew something. In 2025, AI algorithms analyzing global tide charts from the last 100 years discovered an anomaly. Every 11.3 years, a global synchronized surge in microtides occurs, tides just millimeters high, nearly invisible. But globally present, they moved like clockwork. The pattern was too perfect, too stable, too intentional. When overlaid with lunar eclipse date, another match. And if one looked deeper, solar wind patterns, brainwave cycles in deep sleep, and even mass migration timings of animals began to align with that same cycle. One rhythm, one pulse, from the moon to the sea, to the blood, to the mind. Every drop of water on this planet is cycled through the ocean at some point. Every tear, every rainfall, every heartbeat. We are not separate from it. We are it. And when the ocean finally speaks in full, when the moon's last word arrives, it won't just be the sea that rises. It will be everything. Asterisk in May 2025, satellite monitoring. Thermal anomalies over the Pacific detected something impossibly immense. Circular warm zone rising from the depths with no geothermal origin. No volcano, no hydrothermal vent. The warmth wasn't from below. It was spreading horizontally, as though pushed by an unseen hand. The pattern measured 3,476 kilometers in diameter, the exact diameter of the moon, for 9 minutes. The water inside the zone pulsed with infrared frequency, faint, regular, mathematical. The pulses mimicked the pattern of the moon's libration, the subtle wobble that lets us see slightly more than half its surface over time. But this wasn't the moon moving. This was the sea mirroring it, as if the ocean was watching the moon and blinking back. Back on Earth, a marine biologist in Chile recorded unusual behavior in squid populations. They rose in mass from deep water, not to feed or mate, but to drift near the surface during a waning crescent moon. Every tentacle spread outward, every eye fixed upward. They floated perfectly still. For hours then, without cue or cause, they dove simultaneously, vanishing. This happened on 3 separate nights. No moonlight, no shadow, no temperature trigger, but seismic monitors picked up an ultra-low frequency. Hum beneath them, not mechanical, not tectonic. A tone, same as before, 210.42. J. A sound that never changed. A sound that waited in Alaska. Ice core researchers drilling into ancient permafrost found layers of salt water trapped within frozen columns. Embedded in the salt were spores, microbial life forms older than any previously known. But the most disturbing part? The spores glowed faintly under lunar spectrum UV light. They responded to the moon. They rotated. They released enzymes in perfect sync with the lunar cycle, frozen for 80,000 years. They had not died. They had waited. And they had remembered. One researcher suggested these life forms weren't frozen in time. They were frozen in rhythm. Preserved not by temperature, but by signal. Stored in the Earth's crust until the moon's whisper grew loud, enough to wake them. The idea was dismissed. The data was locked, but it was too late. Because similar spores began appearing in deep ocean sediment cores taken near the Mariana Trench. Not the same type, but the same behavior. Activation under moonlight, resonance with the same tone. They weren't from the same species, but they were part of the same system. In 1982, a forgotten radio astronomer filed a report claiming to have received an echoed lunar signal, not reflected radio waves, but delayed emissions. He claimed the signal bounced not from the moon's surface, but from inside its load, distorted then returned. The echo's delay matched the round-trip travel, time between Earth and the deepest part of the Pacific Ocean. He believed it was the sea that replied, not an echo. Relay. He was dismissed. The files were sealed, but someone believed him. In 1999, Classified naval operation placed sensor arrays deep inside the Tonga Trench far below where any sonar normally functions. Their logs remained silent for nearly a decade, until 2010. That year, during a total lunar eclipse, every sensor triggered at once. The pressure wave it recorded wasn't seismic, it was harmonic. The depth of the source was measured at over 12 kilometers, possible by known oceanic topology. And yet, the sound came from beneath the seabed, from something deeper and still. The frequency was the same. 210.42 hertz. A tone so constant, so stable, it could not have been created by natural motion. It was a beacon. It was instruction. In the caves of southern France, the oldest cave paintings known to man include images of waves, spirals, and a sphere that glows above them all. Archaeologists called it the sun, but it wasn't. The ancient pigment contains traces of crushed seashells, ground fine and mixed with animal fat. The artists didn't live by the coast. They had to carry those shells hundreds of miles inland. Why? Because even then, even 30,000 years ago, they understood. The moon and the sea were never apart. They were twin voices in the same breath, a breath we forgot how to hear. But now, the sea is rising, the moon is full, and the signal grows louder. In May 2025, a satellite monitoring thermal anomalies over the Pacific detected something impossibly immense. Circular warm zone rising from the depths with no geothermal origin, no volcano, no hydrothermal vent. The warmth wasn't from below, it was spreading horizontally, as though pushed by an unseen hand. The pattern measured 3,476 kilometers in diameter, the exact diameter of the moon, for 9 minutes. The water inside the zone pulsed with infrared frequency faint, regular, mathematical. The pulses mimicked the pattern of the moon's libration. The subtle wobble that lets us see slightly more than half its surface over time. But this wasn't the moon moving. This was the sea mirroring it, as if the ocean was watching the moon and blinking back. Back on Earth, a marine biologist in Chile recorded unusual behavior in squid populations. They rose en masse from deep water, not to feed or mate, but to drift near the surface during a waning crescent moon. Every tentacle spread outward, every eye fixed upward. They floated perfectly still. For hours then, without cue or cause, they dove simultaneously, vanishing. This happened on 3 separate nights. No moonlight, no shadow, no temperature trigger, but seismic monitors picked up an ultra-low frequency. Hum beneath them, not mechanical, not tectonic. A tone, same as before, 210.42. Goo. A sound that never changed. A sound that waited in Alaska. Ice core researchers drilling into ancient permafrost found layers of salt water trapped within frozen columns. Embedded in the salt were spores microbial life forms older than any previously known. But the most disturbing part, the spores glowed faintly under lunar spectrum UV light. They responded to the moon. They rotated. They released enzymes in perfect sync with the lunar cycle, frozen for 80,000 years. They had not died. They had waited and they had remembered. One researcher suggested these life forms weren't frozen in time, they were frozen in rhythm. Preserved not by temperature, but by signal. Stored in the Earth's crust until the moon's whisper grew loud, enough to wake them. The idea was dismissed. The data was locked, but it was too late because similar spores began appearing in deposition sediment cores taken near the Mariana Trench. Not the same type, but the same behavior. Activation under moonlight, resonance with the same tone. They weren't from the same species, but they were part of the same system. In 1982, a forgotten radio astronomer filed a report claiming to have received an echoed lunar signal not reflected radio waves, but delayed emissions. He claimed the signal bounced not from the moon's surface, but from inside its load, stored it, then returned. The echo's delay matched the round-trip travel, time between Earth and the deepest part of the Pacific Ocean. He believed it was the sea that replied, not an echo, eh? Relay, he was dismissed. The files were sealed, But someone believed him. In 1999, classified naval operation placed sensor arrays deep inside the Tonga Trench, far below where any sonar normally functions. Their logs remained silent for nearly a decade, until 2010, that year. During a total lunar eclipse, every sensor triggered at once. The pressure wave, it recorded, wasn't seismic, it was harmonic. The depth of the source was measured at over 12 kilometers. It's impossible by known oceanic topology. And yet, the sound came from beneath the seabed, from something deeper and still. The frequency was the same, 210.42 Hz, a tone so constant, so stable, it could not have been created by natural motion. It was a beacon, it was instruction, in the caves of southern France. The oldest cave paintings known to man include images of waves, spirals, and a sphere that glows above them all. Archaeologists called it the sun, but it wasn't. The ancient pigment contains traces of crushed seashells ground fine and mixed with animal fat. The artists didn't live by the coast. They had to carry those shells hundreds of miles inland. Why? Because even then, even 30,000 years ago, they understood the moon and the sea were never apart. They were twin voices in the same breath, a breath we forgot how to hear. But now, the sea is rising, the moon is full, and the signal grows louder. Asterisk, in June 2025, a deep-ocean fiber optic cable stretching between New Zealand and Antarctica began transmitting corrupted data during a supermoon. At first, engineers believed it was a malfunction, perhaps seismic activity or pressure shifts. But the error wasn't random. The disruption appeared every 19 minutes and 32 seconds. Exactly one lunar synodic half-cycle divided by pi. The distortion wasn't noise. It was a pulse. And, within the pulse, analysts detected a pattern by narrow-like spacing. Not a message in language, but in intervals. Time is communication. As if something ancient, slow, and precise had found a way to speak through infrastructure we built for ourselves. It didn't hijack our machines. It used them. Across the same, weak marine life in multiple oceans shifted migration patterns. Tuna moved into colder waters. Whales broke from breeding paths. And a species of jellyfish never seen north of the equator was caught glowing in the Arctic Sea. They weren't fleeing danger. They were following something we couldn't see, but they could. Feel in Egypt's Temple of Khonsu? Inscriptions long thought to describe star patterns were retranslated using recent lunar data models. Scholars now believe the temple was not for worship but calibration. The moon was not the deity. It was the instrument, the inscriptions detailed. Intervals between tidal movements and seismic comma, kind of predictive tide code. A way of knowing when the earth would rest, not to fish, not to sail, but to listen. In 2025, the U.S. Naval Oceanographic Office released redacted portions of Project Silva, a decades-long program meant to track irregular marine pressure signatures. One entry described radial depressions in the seafloor occurring without tectonic causal was circular, always silent, always beneath new moons. Some depressions filled back in after weeks. Others remained. But the most disturbing discovery was this. Within each depression, water salinity dropped to near freshwater levels. In the middle of the ocean, for no reason except one possibility, something opened and something left or returned. In ancient Chinese scrolls, water dragons are described as sleeping in the ocean's deepest folds, stirred only by the call of the moon. These weren't myths. A flying serpents, but of currents that rose with impossible power, shifting entire harbors without storm or quake. What if they weren't monsters? What if they were movements? Answers. In 2004, a subsonic drone deployed beneath the Weddell Sea stopped transmitting for 2 minutes and 14 seconds. When it came back online, it had recorded nothing. No footage, no readings. Just one small anomaly. Its onboard gyroscope had rotated, 33 degrees off. Axis not from impact, from redirection, as if space had twisted. Underwater, Later simulations confirmed that, for the drone to have shifted that way, it would have needed to be inside a moving sphere of gravitational resistance, like a capsule or a lens made of water and directed from above. The moon was 93 degrees overhead. Its light didn't reach that depth, but something else did. A gravitational signature, pulsing, echoing, vibrating through salt, through pressure, through time. In the Tibetan Book of the Ocean, forbidden section speaks of the second silence, a time when the sea will no longer ebb and flow, but hold its breath, not in destruction, but in attention. The sea, it says, will turn its face to the moon and wait for the answer, not myth.memory. Ancient humans were never inventing stories. They were translating signals, messages they didn't have, the science to measure, but the instinct to feel. And now with satellites, sensors, sonar, fiber optics, we're picking up what they heard in dreams, what they painted on cave walls, what they sang to the tides, A rhythm returning a question sent. In gravity and soon, an answer rising in waves. In July 2025, a cargo ship crossing the South Pacific encountered what the crew described as a motionless horizon. For over 6 hours, the ocean became unnaturally still, no waves, no wind, no currents. Instruments continued working, but GPS coordinates froze in place, as if the ship hovered in time, not just space. One sailor recorded the experience on a handheld device. In the footage, the sun shines normally, but the moon is faintly visible in the daytime sky. And every 47 seconds, the water trembles not visibly, but audibly, a low, repetitive thrum in the hull, almost like a drum beat. For 7 seconds, the lunar synodic beat divided by the square. Root of Earth's axial tilt, too precise to be natural, too obscure to be known. It ended just as it began. Suddenly, a single gust of wind and the ocean returned to motion. The ship's GPS jumped 1.3 nautical miles forward, as if it had skipped through time. Later, analysts checked satellite records. The cloud patterns around the ship had also frozen stilled in motion. For a 5-kilometer radius, not static, it's just paused. The moon, that day, was perfectly aligned between Earth and the galactic core. We think the moon belongs to us, that it orbits for us, but perhaps it orbits the message, and we are only bystanders in underground catacombs. Beneath ancient Malta, a chamber called the Oracle Room has perfect acoustic resonance. A human voice chanted at a specific pitch vibrates the stone and air in such a way that those standing inside feel disoriented, lifted, even detached from their bodies. That pitch? 210.42 hertz. The same frequency emerging from the ocean. The same tone, pulsing from beneath the moon. And in ancient times, the Oracle Room was flooded during full moons, not by accident. By design, water enhanced the resonance, carried it, translated it. Elsewhere in 2025, a team of cryptographers examining sonar recordings from deep ocean drones stumbled across something uncanny, an exact replica of the golden ratio, emerging in wave interference patterns, not just once, but consistently, across multiple oceans, always between 3:11 and 3:17 a.m. It's local time. They weren't looking for it, but it was looking for them. The patterns formed spirals, mirrored loops, and at their center void, silence. A node, a space where sound collapsed. One researcher whispered, "It's not water anymore." In a laboratory in Germany, physicists experimenting with moonlight in vacuum-sealed chambers discovered that when concentrated into a water droplet under high pressure, the light scattered in fractal geometries patterns that matched satellite photos of certain coral atolls in the Pacific, not coincidentally, precisely down to the angle of the reef. Coral following lunar light, water folding itself to memory islands, forming not where tectonics rise, but where the moon sings loudest. All across the globe, whales began altering their songs. The change was subtle at first, minor frequency shifts, pauses where none existed before. But when overlaid on lunar data, a pattern emerged. Their songs were syncing to the moon's current orbital decay path, as the moon drifts 3.8 centimeters farther each year. The whales sing slower, as if following something, as if mourning or preparing. In secret archives of the Vatican, references exist to a second Genesis, prophecy where the voice of salt shall rise to meet the watcher of night. The text claims the earth once listened to a great tide of thought, long before cities, before language. A tide that only returned once the cycle reset, not in fire, not in flood, but in frequency. And that cycle is measured by precession and lunar. Drift ends soon, not centuries from now, soon. Every sea creature that pulses, every kelp forest that sways, every wave that kisses the shawl of them move not just by wind or tide, but by instruction. The moon doesn't light the ocean. It writes on it and the ocean. It's no longer reading, it's remembering. And when memory becomes motion, the earth will no longer be silent. Asterisk, in August 2025. Deep-sea divers operating near the Java Trench discovered an ancient metallic structure embedded in the ocean floor. It wasn't a shipwreck. There were no bolts, no seams, no rivets, just a smooth, curved surface resembling burnished obsidian, yet magnetic and vibrating faintly beneath touch. The team tried to cut a sample, but every tool failed. The strangest part, the structure vibrated. Only during lunar transit, as the moon passed overhead. The metal pulsed not randomly, but rhythmically, and within that rhythm was a signal. Not radio. Not sonar. Something older. A researcher placed a hydrophone nearby and recorded 12 minutes of dense, layered sound. When the signal was later passed through spectrum analysis, it produced shapes waves, circles, spirals drawn in sound. And those spirals matched carvings found in Neolithic stone. Circles across the globe, the same symbols, from the sea, from the sky, from before memory. Later, biologists on the same expedition collected plankton samples around the structure. What she found defied every model. The plankton had arranged themselves into hexagonal patterns. Microscopic, perfect, and luminous under lunar light. It was as if the sea was responding to an ancient command, or carrying it forward. In Peru. High. In the Andes, where no ocean can be seen, villagers still honor the Moontide Festivola tradition, where they pour water into stone basins and wait for it to ripple unnaturally. Every 5 to 7 years, they say, the water will shiver. Even without wind, 22.5 was one of those years. And the ripple began the moment the moon reached its lowest declination of the decade. They say, when the water shivers, the sea speaks. Through memory, they say it is the breath of the old ones, not spirits, not gods, but tides. In Iceland, glacial melt exposed a cavern never mapped before. At its center, a frozen dome of salt water, perfectly spherical, encased in crystal. No river or sea had ever touched it, yet inside, a single fossil of a deep ocean creature was preserved, a creature found only in the Mariana Trench, 3 kilometers below sea level. But this was over 1,000 meters above sea level. How did it get there? And carbon dated. The ice crystal returned a shocking result. The meltwater was nearly 120,000 years old. The same age as the last full lunar alignment with Earth's equator and orbital node. The moon had been in that exact position only once, since now. Today, this year, the alignment is returning, and so is the signal. A signal not just in sound, in memory, across hundreds of ancient cultures. The sea is referred to with feminine names. Mother Ocean, Yamaya, Tiamat, Thalassa, and the moon, too, is feminine. Not by coincidence, but by recognition, because both do something no man made. System can. They remember not just seasons and cycles, but intent, purpose, words never spoken, instructions never printed. In 2025, researchers from Japan's National Maritime Agency discovered that certain fish eggs only hatched when exposed to lunar reflected light refracted through ocean waves at specific angles. They tested every other variable temperature, salinity, pressure. Only the lunar reflected waveform triggered life. Not light, not heat. Form, geometry. The ocean didn't just need the moon, it understood it, and life obeyed, in secret observatories beneath Mount Kenya. A seismograph picked up an anomaly at 3:33 a.m. local time for 3 consecutive nights. Not tremors. Not shocks, breaths, 3. It's inhalations. Deep, measured, uniform. The sound wasn't from the mountain, it came from under lake. And every breath aligned with the moon's apex. Something below the lake was exhaling with the moon. A rhythm, no. Animal matches, no machine mimics, but the ocean knows the old tide legends. Lemuria cities swallowed hold. They were never about punishment. They were about silence. The kind of silence that waits for signal. And now, the signal is nearly complete. The ocean has heard the full command. The moon has whispered all its verses, and the sea is rising to speak. In September 2025, a specialized neutrino detection array beneath the Mediterranean Sea recorded an anomaly unlike anything in its decades of operation. Designed to pick up faint cosmic interactions, it instead detected a patterned burst of low energy. Neutrinos not from the sky, but from below, from the seafloor. The burst occurred at the exact midpoint of a lunar eclipse. The array's engineers tried to explain it as background noise. But when they plotted the wavelet's intervals, rise and fall, they saw it was not random. It was structured musical. 12 notes. Then a pause. 12 more, the same structure found in ancient Sumerian hymns to Nana the moon god. The same structure encoded in Polynesian wave chants, sung to guide boats through open sea without map or star. This wasn't data, this was memory, returning in Greenland. Meltwater revealed a submerged circle of stones beneath an ice shelf. Perfectly arranged, 49 stones wide, with a shallow basin in the center carved with overlapping wave patterns. Researchers found microscopic barnacles fossilized into the outermost stones, barnacles that only grow in warm, equatorial waters. Yet this circle had been buried beneath glacial ice for at least 90,000 years before the last interglacial period before. Recorded history, and at the center of the basin, carved moon, above it, an empty circle, the moon then, and the moon now. But the empty circle was wider, as if something larger once orbited us, or as if the moon used to be closer and had since pulled away perhaps, after completing its message, or before returning to send it again. On a ship near the equator, a group of sailors awoke in the middle of the night to a strange silence. The engines hummed. The ocean was calm, but above them, a bright full moon shimmered on waters that did not move, not a wave, not a ripple, just liquid glass reflecting the sky, and on that glass, their own faces blurred not by movement, but by delay. The reflections lagged behind their real motions by a fraction of a second. Impossible. Unless surface wasn't reflecting light, but something else. Something older than vision. Something returning the memory of motion. On land, a linguist studying the oldest surviving words in human language noted that nearly every language contains root sounds for mother, water, and moon that share phonetic elements ma, mu, na, uma, luma. Not coincidence. Remnants of a time when human tongues shaped their first sounds by what they heard in their dreams, sounds carried to them not from the trees, the land, but from the rising tide that sang under moonlight. In Namibia, desert dunes began vibrating days before any seismic event. Scientists detected a low hum again, 210.42 hertz scumming not from the ocean, but from beneath the dry ground. When they drilled, they found salt water, ancient, trapped deep under desert sands, and inside it, crustacean species thought extinct. For over 2 million years alive, blinking slowly in darkness, and every 12 hours, the moon passed above, they moved. No sunlight, no photosynthesis, just tide. Just memory. They had been waiting in northern Russia. Radar facility used to study atmospheric drift reported that during specific lunar alignments, Signals sent into the upper ionosphere were returning not only from space, but from beneath the ocean's surface. The waves returned upside down, reversed, as though bouncing from a mirror laid across the seafloor, or a boundary, a membrane. One that was beginning to thin. Myths across the Pacific speak of the time when the floor breathes. Islands that tremble, not from earthquakes, but from tides beneath the earth. Sacred spots where old ones sleep not in the sky, not in the stars, but in the water, waiting for their moon, waiting for its song to end, for the chorus to begin. Because if the ocean is a vault, the moon is the key, and the lock is turning. In October 2025. An undersea drilling platform in the South China Sea hit something unexpected 40 meters beneath the seafloor. The drill bit struck a layer of solid crystal unlike any known mineral. It didn't fracture or crack. Instead, it vibrated softly at first, then with increasing intensity, till the drill shut itself down. The vibrations were rhythmic, measured timed perfectly with the lunar apogee, the moon's farthest point. From Earth, when the crystal core was extracted and examined under lab conditions, its interior revealed alternating layers of silicate and carbon arranged in concentric spirals. But these weren't natural formations. They were too perfect, too consistent. Like grooves on a record, one intern, curious, ran a laser across the surface. The crystal resonated. The room filled with a low hum, 210.42 hertz. That. Again, it came not from machines, not from errors, but from the sea. Again and again, as though this frequency wasn't just a sound, but a language, a grammar the Earth once knew, and the moon never forgot. In the jungles of Central America, researchers decoding Olmec inscriptions found a pattern in a forgotten glyphon that appeared to reference the water that dreams and the sky that returns. It had always been dismissed as poetic metaphor, until one of them noticed the glyph's curved geometry. Matched lunar orbital eccentricity carved thousands of years ago with stone tools in a culture without telescopes. How did they know? Would dream whispered this to them. Back in the Indian Ocean, a research buoy near the Chagos archipelago began sending false data. The temperature read 19 degrees Celsius in 31 degrees Celsius waters. Salinity levels dropped below freshwater. But every sensor on the device checked out. Divers were dispatched. They found the buoy surrounded by thousands of jellyfish floating in a perfect spiral. None of them native. None of them recorded before. When removed, the jellyfish disintegrated, within minutes leaving behind only a glowing residue on the divers' suits. Under UV light, the residue formed waveforms, lines, loops, interruptions, a message, a signature. Nobody knew, but it stopped the moment the moon set. In France, cryptologists, analyzing known ciphers, were asked to run the ocean tone frequencies through historic decoding keys. When aligned with lunar cycles, certain frequency spikes translated into repeated segments of the Fibonacci sequence, broken at one specific point. The break, exactly where the moon's gravitational pull on Earth equals the pull of Earth on the moon. That balance point, that silence. It wasn't an error, it was a pause, as if waiting for us to finish a sentence. And now, we have in the Arctic Circle, an old Inuit legend once dismissed by scholars, told of the second sky beneath the water. Elders claim that under certain moons the sea opens a mirror, and those from below speak to the white circle. Above, in 2025, a sonar team scanning under polar ice recorded a false Florin echo that suggested the water was deeper than the ice would allow. They dropped a probe. It vanished. No signal, no wreckage. But hours later, the ice above cracked. In concentric rings, perfect circles, spaced evenly outward. Like ripples frozen in time. Like a lens focusing. Like an eye opening. Everywhere. The signs converge. The dreams increase. People across continents wake at the same hour to 3:33 a.m. They report the same sound, the same pressure in the skull, the same image burned into their mind's eye. Moon glowing over water that moves backward, as if time itself has turned. They are not prophets, not mad, just tuned in, just listening to the last pages of a very old book, written not in ink, but in tide, in pull, in memory, in moon song. And now that song is almost finished, and the silence after will be the answer.